just to my left here, we've got Andre Recalde, Director of the Peruvian Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and also a consultant in the area of community relations, particularly in South America. We've also got oh, you don't have the list.
Not on there.
They do not on the. We've got Steve West here from, Andy West. Yeah, I'll get that right. From Trilogy Metals, and Matt King from Newmont. So we've got quite an interesting panel here with some diverse experience, some extensive experience in South America with community relations, working for a small mining company in Trilogy Metals, and Matt with larger organisation with more of a global footprint. So look forward to discussing innovation and social licence. So there are two terms that we've heard in the word cloud, as mentioned previously: innovation and social licence. So I think it's a good idea that we define what those two terms actually are. They've been spoken about a lot yesterday, but I think it's a good idea to have a definition for both of them. So I'm going to use a fellow Queenslander's definition, a lecturer at the University of Queensland, Tim Castell. They call him the innovation guy at the university. So he has a very simple definition of innovation. It's the execution of new ideas to create value. So I find that quite an elegant definition of innovation. 3 components: it's new, it's being executed, and it's creating value. As for social licence, well, I'm going to draw on what we've been working on at the CSIRO for almost a decade now. We've come up with a numerical model of social licence. It models the relationship that a community has, a host community has with its local mining operation. And that model, that numerical model, uses the concept of acceptance as a proxy for social licence. And that acceptance, the pathway to acceptance, comes through the concept of trust. And trust has drivers. Various things push buttons in communities to develop or erode trust. So that's one useful definition of social licence, the notion of acceptance, where trust is at the centre of building or eroding that relationship. And that numerical model is the basis for reflexivity services to the mining industry. So there are 2 definitions of innovation and social licence. So I'm going to ask the panel to relay their experiences on where new ideas have been implemented to create new value to affect building trust with host communities. So I'm wondering if we could start with you, Matt. Where, in your experience, have those concepts come together?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me. So I started thinking about, what are some new things that we're doing in community relations? More specifically, what are some new things we're doing to generate trust, as Rolf mentioned? And one of the most recent projects that I worked on is in Suriname. I've been working there for several years now. And I had the great opportunity to do 2 projects. The first one, we were doing something new in a new country with new stakeholders and new issues. And we completed the Marion project, and that's an operating mine now. And directly after that, that's really where the innovation began, because we took something that we had and we started to make it better and new and create value with it. And so this is a new project that's just right next to our Marion gold mine. And we were able to kind of create a forum for innovation. We invited experts and thought leaders and academics and different NGOs to come together and help us to innovate using what we'd learned at the Marion Project. And come up, they eventually wrote a paper about it, and come up with an innovative new way. Like, if they could have done it themselves, what would they have done differently? And I was able to take that outcome and those learnings and apply them almost immediately to this neighboring project. It had some different stakeholders. It's still in Suriname. And it really allowed us to innovate, to create these new ways of doing things. So we redesigned the impact assessment process to really align with free, prior, informed consent. Every single step of the way, we agreed with several different groups of stakeholders. Who had the right to consent, for instance? Who were the right stakeholders? Who were the right people to involve in this whole entire process? So we agreed on the scope of the study. We agreed on the methodology of the study. Our community stakeholders were constantly providing ideas and input and ways to do things that made them more comfortable with this. And so from the very beginning, that was kind of our entrance into this community. We were creating trust, and it was asking for input and then showing them how we incorporated that input into what we do. They were hired to do the execution of the baseline studies. So they were very involved in the entire process. After we did the baseline studies and we did the impact assessment, we brought back the findings and we said, well, are you okay with this? Does this make sense to you? What kind of feedback do you have? And so now that that's over, we continue to engage and continue to have this relationship that I feel is quite innovative in the way that we built it, and we kind of garnered trust between each party. I think it was difficult also for Newmont to be so transparent in what we were sharing with them. I think we had to become a little bit more comfortable with sharing things a little earlier in the project development time period than normal. And so we kind of had to trust them that this was a beneficial relationship that we both needed to invest in. So
that's interesting, Matt. How you said about being comfortable. It's our experience in implementing our methodology is the concept of, we're talking about trust, and that also means, in some senses, a sense of vulnerability for the mining company. I know we had this discussion before, and I guess you hadn't thought of it as being vulnerable, but we see that in our work, that a lot of companies are uncomfortable about being vulnerable, and that's a new concept for them, a new sensation within the company to build trust with communities. So I'm wondering, Andy, in your experiences in Alaska with your operations there, where are new ideas creating value?
I think some of the new ideas, well, to start off is, you're probably wondering, I'm a geologist. What is a geologist doing up here? Talking about social responsibility or community engagement. But really, especially when you're a small junior, you're really the first people on the ground in a community or in an area. And you're going to be the first face that they see and the first interaction that they have with an exploration company or a mining company. And I think, unfortunately, even though it's rather common sense that you approach those communities before doing any work, it is almost innovative, at least in some of the junior sector, to actually do that. And I think that's, and there's lots of great projects littered across the world that, were doomed from the start from that lack of engagement, where, they came in saying, oh, we have the legal right to be here, we're here, we'll give you jobs. But you don't have a say because we have the legal right, and of course that that doesn't go in this day and age, or it shouldn't have gone in any day and age. So you have to have that buy-in. And so with our company, we're a small company. We have 10 or 12 people, And so it really becomes everybody's responsibility for community engagement. So, geologists will be visiting villages. Our environmental person will be, doing the newsletter, also doing village visits. Geologists are doing workforce development classes and such. So it's really everybody's responsibility. And really, at the end of the day, where you see the value in it, if you want to put dollars on it, when a major or somebody else comes looking for a project, they're not only looking for, your size, your exploration potential, your grade, but certainly these days, they're looking, do they have community engagement? Do they have community buy-in? Are there issues? Are there, significant parts of the population or the local or even, statewide that are against the project that they have to.
That's interesting.
That can be an
You're almost monetizing that level of trust that you've attained in your greenfields operations. The work that you've done in building up trust with the community translates into real value if a major comes across.
Yeah, it does. But certainly that's one of our aims. But the main aim is just to build that trust with the community, so that we can be, at first be good visitors as we first come in, and then eventually as things develop, that we're good neighbors. And that we're accepted into that community.
Great. Andre, can you lend us some experiences in Latin America?
Sure. Thank you for giving me the chance to be part of this. Basically, the last 15 years of my experience in working with community relations in Latin America, I have seen a major shift in the commitment the corporate level have to do with getting this social acceptance. No? I was discussing with Rolf, in Latin America, if you come and trying to translate the English expression social license to operate, it's not welcome. And the reason is very simple. Latin America has a tradition of very weak governance structures, especially in the rural areas. So if you come there with the concept of we want to discuss how to get a social license to operate here, the image they create in their mind is that they need to grant you something, that they have the power or the authority to grant you something, and this is something because of that weak governance comes in through political gains, confusion, who decides what requires from you, and it's not easy. So that's why practitioners like me in Latin America prefer to enter the community with the concept of we want to be a good neighbor here, we want to share what is the common goals here, trying to contribute to the common good of this community. It's not easy to come and say we want to be granted a social license for the reason I explained. So that's one difference in the concept. In terms of innovation, the corporate sector, the corporate leadership is they need to walk their talk. They need to put resources in order to make this acceptance happen. It's gone the time when the corporate sector say, well, someone else must come and talk to the community, and the community must be happy with us. And when the person hired to do this asks, well, what should I offer the community? Well, nothing. Just tell them that we're going to be there. And that's not possible. No? You need to commit your presence for acceptance with some resources in terms of people, in terms of resources, monetary resources, to share with the common goals that the community has. In other words, it's to be a good neighbor. No? You move to a new neighborhood, and your neighbors look at you at a distance. You drive in your car to the driveway, and they say, very timid, but then they wait you to come, or others come to you, but you need to engage. You cannot live in the neighborhood isolated, no? They will feel you're strange or doing something illegal in your house. So you need to open up. But because it's a corporation, there are many faces, and it's important you have one face, one message, and it's consistent over the time. No? That's I see as innovation. Maybe I will comment more after about tools and data.
No, that's very interesting. Matt, you mentioned free, prior, informed consent, FPIC, process. So I wonder if you could expand on that and whether you needed to adapt it for your Marion mine site and the community's engagement process there.
Yeah, well, I think just the idea of FPIC is relatively new, given all the other issues in mining. And so we really don't have the experience base that a lot of other things have. And so, I don't know, kind of the way I see it is every place, at least that Newmont works, with indigenous people is a very different context and requires just a natural, innovative approach to it, or you have to be creative in how you design your engagement strategies and your messaging, and I think one of the most important pieces is just acknowledging that us as the company doesn't really know the best way to do it. And that inherently in free, prior, informed consent, it's the community that needs to be comfortable with this process. And often they've never done this before. And a big piece of getting everybody ready is capacity building and getting to the same point so that the community is ready to participate in the process, but so is the company. And I think it's taken just as much capacity building on both sides to feel comfortable, like you mentioned, and kind of not vulnerable to the process. Companies are not used to putting something on the line or committing to anything until well after we've funded it. And that's different in this process. And you have to be comfortable with coming forward with what you have, and that takes some training, it takes capacity building. I worked very closely with the communities in Suriname to get them to the point where they felt comfortable. And we used all sorts of kind of new tools, technology. We used maps, Google Earth, models, everything that we could think of to make it a hands-on experience. And all of it was new for Newmont. I know there's other projects out there that have used various things to get to that point, but it was all quite new for us, and I think we put a lot of effort into being creative and spending a lot of time. If you look at the project timeline, the social responsibility group actually had a milestone and a critical path item, and that didn't used to happen. It used to be very project-driven and budget-driven, and we were able to get the project teams buy into this and really integrate it into it. And that was a new thing that we had to, if we really wanted to complete this project in the name of free, prior, informed consent, you had to do this new stuff. And so I think we did a good job integrating it and delivering on that.
Sounds like you've developed quite a mature process around FPIC. Are you confident that can be applied successfully elsewhere?
In general,
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's a good approach, given that you have to walk into the process knowing that all of the details are going to be different versus wherever the context that you're operating in. But to build it into that schedule, to build it into the budget, to really have social responsibility being one of the main project team members is a big step forward.
That's interesting. Also, your observation about how individual each circumstance is, that certainly resonates with the research we've done, is that every relationship between an operation and the community is unique, and hence why we went down the pathway of creating a model of that relationship and being able to characterise what are the drivers of trust in that circumstance, and get away from the notion just because something worked over here in this community, in that environment, with those circumstances, the same tactics to build trust and initiatives aren't necessarily going to work in another part of the world. It's almost intuitive, really, but you see it quite a lot, that people think something has worked over there, well, let's try it over here. So that came out of our research, is to really characterise that context and then use the methods that are most appropriate in that environment. Andy, you mentioned in our previous discussions the Indigenous Corporation up there in Alaska. Nana, can you explain how how that's
Sure.
how
It's
that
one of
relationship
one
works?
of the unique relationships that we have, and certainly on this panel, and knowing with a lot of the issues in Canada and Australia, that Alaska is really unique in its Indigenous or Native relationship, is that when oil was discovered on the North Slope, they quickly realized that they had to, actually a lot of the Native groups realized that this was their chance to settle some of their claims or their ancestral claims. And so that was actually brought up in a piece of national legislation that only affected Alaska, but essentially it created Native corporations, regular US corporations, that encompassed their traditional areas and gave them a pot of money. And you know, these are not small companies, these are worldwide conglomerates with operations all over the world. And part of one of our deposits sits on actually land that they had purchased from Kennecott back in the 80s, soon after this was passed. And so, and it abutted against our deposit. So, you know, we realized that we had to build this relationship. And, you know, Nana, if those that are familiar with Red Dog Mine, one of the world's largest zinc mines, is that they are partnered with, Teck is partnered with Red Dog. And so it was a little bit of that model that we used, and certainly the natives in the area are, you know, they have that experience now with mining. They know the benefits that it brings and also the pitfalls. But one of the things that we consciously did is when we started this relationship is that we'd make sure on all our presentations that we'd have the list of our corporate values on one side, and then we'd have the list of NANA's or their region's corporate values on the other side. And NANA stands for the Northwest, just lost it, but it's in Northwest Alaska, lost that train of thought. But anyway, and just two of those values that I want to pick out from them that we've really incorporated into some of our policies is their respect for elders. That's very important, that their elders, you know, hold, you know, their traditions and their knowledge. And so one of the things that we've done is to make sure that we've had an elder on site as a mentor to a lot of the young workers. And, you know, they end up mentoring not only the native workers, but also at times some of the white workers that show up from other parts of Alaska or down south. And so, you know, it's a huge benefit that they have somebody that they can go to and trust and just, you know, talk about anything. And then they can also see the work ethic of their elder, and they can try to emulate that. And one of the other important parts of that aspect is that we've, you know, when an elder dies in the region or in the village, you know, it's a very large event, you know, because family is very important. And so they have a very, you know, time of mourning and you know, funeral services, you know, that they usually bring in a whole bunch of people to build a coffin is one of their customs. And so we have built into our policy leave that, you know, essentially just about anybody can leave for those funeral events. And it does impact our operations at times, but we feel that's worthwhile, that we can help, you know, share that value of elders. And certainly the other, which is, you know, is their, you know, one of our values is hunting ability and being a great hunter, because, you know, they still largely live a subsistence lifestyle. And so, you know, if they're not a good hunter, or at least, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, they starved. So to build that into it, you know, we are near a caribou migration route. And so in the fall, when they're coming down from the North Slope to some of their wintering grounds further to the south, you know, we shut down our operations if we have caribou, 5 or more caribou within a 3/4 mile limit of our, or bubble of our operations. And certainly our schedule of, using a regular roster of 2 weeks or 20 days on, 10 days off, then allows for that subsistence lifestyle that in the fall they can go hunting, in the summer they can go to their fish camp, and then, other times of the year they have that time off to pick berries or whatever food that they have to target at that time, which is obviously very seasonal.
That's a couple of great examples of the company understanding the community. So in a scientific sense, we would call that understanding the drivers of trust. So the relationship with the caribou and the migration and hunting, also the importance of family and ceremony, having that understanding of the drivers of trust is that they're two good examples. Andre, you mentioned in your opening remarks trust with institutions. We're used to working on the levels of trust between community and the mining company. It sounds like in South America there's a double whammy. There's a trust deficit associated with institutions regulating the industry.
Yeah, that's the case. We have a phrase in Latin America, we like soccer in Latin America, is you start the game losing. You go to the field and you are starting with 2-0, because really the background, the preconception of mining, nobody likes it. The background, cultural, historically, is not good. And that's something academics, NGOs, the church, Catholic Church especially, has magnified. And really, I have been talking to people in new areas and said, are you coming from the mining company? How dare you can come to knock my door, because we don't like mining here. So that's negative trust, if you will. That's the kind of thing that people in the company have to work against. But I want to refer to two specific tools that enhance trust. One is environmental impact assessment that is supposed to allow the permit to start the mining operation, exploration or production. And the other is the social impact assessment. Both used to, one is the requirement by the regulator, but I have seen the perception of those two tools by the management is just to check. Is the environmental impact assessment done? Yes or not? Okay, check. But it's a very useful tool in order to design the mitigation activities in a way that enhance the trust with the communities, with the social groups in the communities. If you just check the environmental impact assessment and leave that to whatever happens in the coming years, you are taking more risk than you are supposed to take. So that's why you have to really build your management plan based on a very rigorous measurement and adoption of what are you going to do to mitigate those impacts in terms of environment. Related to that are the social impacts, the change in migration, the new roles, the new value chains that you're going to bring to the community. That's disrupted, completely disrupted. So nobody wants that. But if you present in a way that showing that it's going to be beneficial, the sense of trust may change, may start to born. Oh, you're going to bring more trucks? Are you going to give me the chance to put my family savings into a truck and you hire my truck? Yes, why not? If you comply with these requirements, we will hire your truck. Okay, that's good. And the other non-negotiable for me as a practitioner, as an advisor to companies is the the baseline. The social and economic baseline is a non-negotiable. If you don't have one, if you don't have a good one, it's like you're going to a yacht trip without a compass. It's really, you don't know where you're going. No? If you don't invest significant resources in a good quality and deep social and economic baseline, you are really taking more risk than you are supposed to take.
No, that's a good point, and that's certainly consistent with the research that we've undertaken. Part of our process is to do this baseline. We call it an anchor survey, but then we build on it. We go back to the community on a regular cadence and ask the community, how those drivers of trust are being treated by the company. So really, our motivation is to create or to lift a company's ability to manage social risk to the same levels as they manage all their other risks. The mining industry loves data, often drowns in it and doesn't know what to do with it. But the one risk that we keep hearing from mining executives that is consistently in the top 5 or even at least the top 10 is social license, and that's the one area where no systematic data to manage that particular risk is collected. So our aim is to fill that void and give a tool to companies to manage that more effectively. So just on innovation and South America, I read in preparation for this, Deloitte did a study recently about the landscape, innovation and mining in South America, and they made a point of mentioning social license as one particular risk that there is really a deficit. The profile is so high, but the level of innovation being executed, the new ideas to create value, just isn't there. I suspect that's consistent around the globe, but is that consistent with your experiences? Are new things being tried?
Yes, absolutely. Creativity is a must. Otherwise, there will not be new exploration, new opening of mining projects in Latin America. I want to bring one case in particular. Buenaventura is a Peruvian mining company, a global corporation at this point. But last year, I went to a conference when the CEO, Mr. Benavides, praised that for the first time, Buenaventura, 40 years of experience, they had the opening assembly for approval, social approval by the committees in the local dialect, in Quechua. That's a very big accomplishment because by law it's supposed to be with a lawyer, with a notary, taking note in Spanish, what has been decided, what has been asked, what has been approved. But this time they allow, the laws allow to hold this assembly in the local dialect. And they were very proud of that because Quechua is a language that is very close to emotions. They describe more emotions than grammar. You describe with one sentence more, how do you feel about this? So the permit to allow this new opening for Buenaventura was in Quechua. And at that moment in particular, they created a huge emotional capital for the future of this project. That's one innovation I found interesting.
Simple, isn't it? You'd think that's quite an obvious thing, but so powerful, yeah.
It is.
In your experience in Africa and Suriname, Matt, is there a similar
I
thing
agree
associated
that
with the
there is
language?
certainly a deficit. A lot of companies have innovation roles or even departments focused on process and mine engineering and things like that, and they're certainly not looking into the social field. And so unless the practitioners themselves have time to take away from, actually engaging communities to think about innovative approaches and things, we kind of have to create that space for them. And until that happens, we're really looking at academics, we're looking at different industry associations to kind of spend some time thinking up new ideas, but a lot of times those aren't, it's tough to field truth those things and try to make them applicable, wherever you work. And I think there's two big areas that we could use some innovation in. We talk a lot about participatory monitoring and involving community members in that. But it's very difficult to use the tools we have today that talk in a very scientific language. How do you interpret that for communities? And I know there's got to be creative new ways to measure environmental impacts, social impacts, and do it in a way, that people feel that they can feel that, oh, well, I see that difference. You look at a scientific instrument and it's like, okay, well, there's arsenic in this water and there's less in this water, but there's still numbers here. I mean, what is this all, how does that get communicated back to communities? It'd be one good area of innovation. The other one is how do companies show that they listen to people? We have a lot of social media now. We do a lot on Facebook and Twitter, and there's something in there, I'm sure, around, how do you take the pulse of the people that are paying attention to that and being able to read it, or how do you share that with people who might not have access to those things readily?
Well, I thought we had a pact that we wouldn't talk about social media in
We
this
did.
panel
Sorry,
session.
I brought that up.
Social license, that's always the buzzword, the concept that, scanning and scraping social media to get the community sentiment. But yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, we've got a few minutes left, so I'd invite the audience to ask the panel questions. There we go, we've got someone already.
Hi there, this is a question for the junior and the major, and knowing that the social license is invaluable. How is that transformation of social license, what are the challenges through an acquisition from explorer to major from both company side, but also on the communication with those communities, knowing that they're going to go from a team of 12 to a team of 1,200?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll take that first. I think a lot of it's just being transparent. When we are now partnered with South 32, which is obviously a very large company, we were very forthright in saying, these are going to be our new partners. Within our village visits, we explained the deal and what it could mean for the future. And one of the things we did is, make sure that we got South 32 involved at the very front end also. So, they met with the native corporation. Eventually they went on a lot of our picnics that we have every year so that they could, the people could get, have a face and see a person behind this large corporation. But I think a lot of it's also, setting the expectations that, this big company's coming in that has lots of money, but we're still just at the advanced stage exploration of this program. We're not going to see a huge ramp up of vehicles, cars, people, expenditures at all, that's still a little ways down the road, and that there's other mile markers before that.
I think that's great, and I think that's we spend a lot of time learning about companies that we're going into these deals with, and that's one of the biggest, kind of pluses or strengths on the deal is when a partner really understands how to communicate about expectations and brings us in as, helps us introduce ourselves to the community. That doesn't happen all the time, so that is very appreciated, and something that we look for in mergers, acquisitions is, what are the social practices and how do they align? And a lot of times maybe they don't, but in the good ones they certainly do, and we look for that.
Got a question over here?
My name is Leonard Harris. I am the former general manager of Minera Yanacocha in Peru, and former president and general manager of Newmont, Peru, and vice president and general manager of Newmont, Latin America. We introduced a very, very successful community assistance program at Yanacocha. And I'd like to tell you a few things about it, a few no's and a few yeses. The most important thing is to know the culture of the people. In Yanacocha particularly, the villages around there were all villages that were the time of the Incas that put their troublemakers. So each village had its own different culture. I learned this from a professor at the Catholic University in Lima, who told me about this. You have to deal with each community. And the other thing is, there are no-nos and there are yes-yeses in the community assistance program. I believe that every mining company in the world should have a community assistance program. You agree with that? You people up there? Do you agree or not?
The mining companies,
up.
yeah.
Anyhow,
comment?
the success of our program was that largely due to my wife here sitting at the side, who dealt with the women and the children. Never underestimate the power of women. She started with a program of 900 children, and 10 years later, 5,000 children. We had the help of, Andre mentioned our partner, Buenaventura, and the IFC, and we got help from all of our contractors and everything in our programs. Now, the major thing is to make it a hand-up program, not a hand-out program.
Exactly.
You have to involve the communities as well in everything that we did. We built schools, we built first aid stations, potable water plants, and the community assisted in all of this, including the children. The other thing is that don't get into anything you can't get out of. I'll give you an example of this. I went to see the Bishop of Cacamarca, and he took me to an old folks home run by a nun. And he said, you know, they have a very high electric bill here. Maybe you, Giannacosa, can help them pay the bill. Well, you know, you get into that, how are you ever going to get out of it? So I sent the electricians in to see why do they have such a high electric charge. Well, the nun was preparing for the old folks a big pot of stew every day. She had her own garden where she grew the vegetables and got the meat and that for donations. And the pot was heated by electricity, and that was what was taking up the electricity. We threw that pot out and put in a pot powered by propane. The electric bill went through the floor. They were happy, and we were happy.
There you are.
The other thing is that I firmly believe, we're talking about the future of mining here. The future of mining lies in making deals with the communities, bringing them on board as partners. I'll give you an example of a company in Peru, Australian company, that had very big problems with the community. They gave them 5% of the property, and all the problems disappeared overnight. Now they're partners. They share in the good times and the bad times. Well, with that, would you like to say anything, Rosa?
I think we're out of time now, so thank you very much. Thank you very much for that contribution.
Yes, with in the program around the Minera Yanacocha area, and the programs are excellent. The children from 0 to 13 years old, we took care of them, and they're excellent. Now, at this moment, I'm so proud of it because many of them are carpenters. Most of the young women are dressmakers. They make their own clothes, and that's, I think, we hope to get from everywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Just to close the session off, thank the panels for their contribution to the discussion, and thank you very much for listening.